This is the story of Damaris, a woman from Athens, surrounded by philosophers and idols, logic and debates. But beneath all the questions and arguments, her heart was quietly searching for something more. And when truth came, wrapped not in intellect but in love, she listened. Because even in skeptical places, a sincere heart can respond to truth. The marble steps of the Areopagus still shimmered with heat from the afternoon sun. Damaris stood near the edge of the stone platform, overlooking the city of Athens. The air was thick with the scent of olive oil, old scrolls, and burnt incense. Around her, men in long robes argued about the stars, about gods, about nothing at all. They called it the Hill of Ares, a place for wisdom, a place for power, a place where people talked endlessly but rarely listened. Zeus was born in Crete, one philosopher barked. Zeus was an idea, another snapped, not a person. Ideas don't throw lightning, a third shouted. Laughter followed. Damaris watched in silence, fingers curled around the edge of her shawl. She didn't argue like the others. She didn't shout to be heard, but she listened. Every day, she came not because she wanted to be right, but because she hoped, just maybe, someone would speak something that felt real. A shadow passed over the stones as a bird took flight from the altar nearby. The idol at its base was cracked, its name half faded. To the unknown God, it read. Damaris blinked. Even the stone didn't know who it worshipped anymore. She turned away from the crowd and stepped into the shaded corridor behind the platform. Her sandals clicked softly against the floor. The noise of Athens faded, replaced by the memory of another voice, a softer one. Her father's. It had been 10 years since he died, but she remembered the nights he would sit by the fire, rubbing sandalwood oil into his hands, speaking not of gods, but of meaning. There must be more, he'd whisper, not statues, not names carved into rock, something deeper, someone who sees. Back then, she thought he was simply tired. Now she thought he might have been right. Damaris had grown up in the wealthy part of Athens, among scrolls, servants, and silver bowls. She was taught to read Homer before she could braid her own hair. She'd visited temples on every hill, given offerings to every god. But still, the emptiness remained. And now, in the shadow of the Areopagus, she closed her eyes and breathed a quiet prayer, though she didn't know to whom. If there is truth, I want it. Behind her, a new voice rose, different from the others. Not loud, but bold. Not rehearsed, but alive. She turned to look and saw him. A man with travel-worn robes and fire in his eyes, standing boldly before the council. His name was Paul. And though she didn't know it yet, that moment was the start of everything. Damaris didn't mean to stay. She had only paused near the back of the crowd, one foot turned toward home, the other caught in hesitation. But something about the traveler's voice held her there. It wasn't elegant like the Athenians. It didn't twist words into clever shapes or end every sentence with a question. It was simple, strong. And when he spoke, even the birds stopped squawking on the temple roof. People of Athens, he said, standing before the council, I see that in every way you are very religious. Soft laughter rippled through the crowd. But Paul wasn't mocking them, he was just observing. As I walked through your city, he continued, I saw your many altars. And I found one with this inscription, to the unknown God. Now the crowd leaned in. Damaris felt her heart thud once, hard. What you worship as unknown, I now declare to you. She stepped forward slowly. Other women did too, wealthy ones in fine robes watching from the pillars, servants, older men. Even the philosophers fell still. Paul raised a hand and looked across the Areopagus, not as if he were trying to win an argument, but as if he were trying to wake them up. The God who made the world and everything in it is not made by human hands. He does not live in temples built with stone. He is not served by silver or fire. The idol near Damaris's shoulder suddenly seemed very small. This God, Paul said, created all people from one man. He determined the times and places where we live, so that we would seek him and perhaps reach out for him, though he is not far from any one of us. The words hit something inside her she couldn't explain. Not far, not stone, not unknown. A young boy in the front row whispered to his father. An older man removed his head covering and stared at the ground. Damaris took another step forward. In him, Paul continued, we live and move and have our being. Her father had once used that same phrase, not as poetry, but as a question. Now it came back as an answer. Paul's voice softened. God is not like gold or marble or artwork. He commands all people to turn from empty ways, because one day he will judge the world with justice through the man he raised from the dead. That word, resurrected, set the place on fire. Not literally, but in reactions. Some of the philosophers scoffed and waved him off. Resurrection. Absurd. The gods don't rise, they rule or they fade. Others just laughed and walked away. But Damaris stood still, eyes locked on Paul, because something in her spirit refused to move. She wasn't thinking about the temple behind her, or the scrolls at home, or even her reputation. She was thinking about what it would mean if this unknown God had always been reaching for her. The crowd had started to scatter. Some were still muttering, some were mocking. Others simply drifted back to their scrolls and sandal repairs, pretending none of it had mattered. But for Damaris, the world hadn't returned to normal. Something had shifted inside her. She stepped down from the outer ring of the Areopagus and found herself walking without thinking. Past the altar of Athena, past the cracked statue of Hermes. She moved like she was following a string only she could see, and then she saw him. Paul. Down a narrow corridor, speaking to a small cluster of people under the overhang of a fig tree. The light there was soft. The breeze carried the scent of crushed leaves and charcoal. A few men from the crowd had followed too. One introduced himself as Dionicius, a member of the court. Another was a merchant from Thessaly. Paul welcomed them with no ceremony, as if he'd been expecting company. Damaris hung back for a moment. Then Paul's eyes met hers. Not a stare, not a challenge, just a welcome. You stayed, he said gently. I didn't expect to, Damaris replied. Then you're here for truth, not comfort. I'm not sure I know the difference anymore. Paul nodded and stepped aside, offering her space in the circle. Neither did I, he said, until I met him. They sat beneath the fig tree, the city buzzing faintly behind them. For a few minutes no one said anything. The silence was strange, but peaceful. Then Dionicius spoke up. This resurrection, he asked, was it metaphor? A story? Or are you saying a man who died actually stood up again? Paul didn't blink. He didn't just stand. He walked. He spoke. He ascended. And he promised to return. The group grew still again. And who was he? Damaris asked, eyes narrowing. What kind of man can defy death? Not just a man, Paul said. Jesus of Nazareth, Son of God. He came not to crush us, but to carry our sin and break its power. A God who suffers, she whispered. A Savior, Paul corrected, who loves. Damaris leaned back slightly, her mind racing. Everything in Athens had taught her that gods needed to be pleased, fed, bowed to, feared. But this Jesus didn't demand ritual, he offered relationship. Suddenly, from behind the courtyard wall, the sound of stone crashing shattered the moment. Everyone turned. A statue of Apollo had collapsed, split from its base, head shattered on the floor. A priest rushed forward, shouting in disbelief. The fig tree trembled slightly with the rumble. Bad omen, one man muttered. Or maybe, Damaris whispered, just a coincidence. Paul said nothing. He simply looked at her, with eyes that knew she was standing at a crossroads, and in her heart a question bloomed like fire. What if the gods I've known have all been silent because the real one has just begun to speak? The walk back to her villa should have been familiar. It wasn't. The narrow paths of the upper district, the columns, the gardens, the fountains, had always made Damaris feel safe. Safe in her status, safe in her education, safe in the system that had raised her. But tonight, it all felt like a museum. Rooms filled with stone and silence. When she stepped through the gate, the housekeeper met her at once. Your mother has been waiting, she whispered, and you've missed the evening meal. Tell her I was at the court, Damaris said. She knows, the woman replied nervously. That's the problem. In the main hall, lamps flickered against polished silver. Mosaics lined the walls. Zeus, Poseidon, Athena. The gods her family had trusted for generations. At the far end of the table, her mother sat tall, spine like a sword. And beside her, a man Damaris hadn't seen in over a year, Theron. A visiting philosopher from Corinth, older, influential, and long favored by her mother as a suitable match. Damaris, her mother said, voice clipped. Come, we were just discussing the speeches from the Areopagus. Were you? Damaris replied carefully. Theron smiled, a smirk tucked beneath a trimmed beard. I heard you stayed until the end. Quite the performance. This Paul, traveling mystic, dramatic. He wasn't dramatic, Damaris said. He was clear. A tense silence settled over the table. Her mother poured wine with exaggerated care. Damaris, we understand the appeal. You've always been drawn to words, to mystery, but that man preaches rebellion against our gods, against tradition, against the mind itself. He didn't preach rebellion, Damaris said slowly. He spoke of a God who made us and wants to be known. The unknown God. Theron chuckled. That altar was built to avoid offense, not to invite it. Damaris looked at them, her mother, stiff with pride, Theron, dripping with sarcasm, and felt suddenly out of place in her own home. How could they not feel it? How could they not hear what she heard? He said God doesn't live in temples or statues, she said, that he raised a man from the dead as proof, not for show, for salvation. Enough, her mother snapped, slamming her cup down. You are not a street orator. You are my daughter. You are from a house that serves Olympus. Then why, Damaris whispered, does Olympus always feel so far away? Her words echoed. Even Theron was speechless. Damaris stood, heart pounding, and walked to the edge of the mosaic floor. She stared at the carved figures of the gods on the wall. They looked powerful, but also lifeless. Eyes without sight, hands without help. "You've always said the gods protect us," she murmured, "but when Father died, who answered then?" Silence. Not even the wind stirred. This man, Paul, spoke of a God who listens, who comes near, who gives, not to be worshipped from fear, but to be known in love. Her mother stood. "That's enough." "It's just beginning," Damaris replied, and she left the room. That night she sat alone on the rooftop garden. Stars blinked above the city, and in the distance she could see the shadowed shape of the Areopagus. She thought about the idol that read, "To the unknown God," and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel lost in the question. She felt found by it. The fig grove was quieter than before. No voices, no laughter, just the sound of leaves rustling in the wind like whispers unsure of where to land. Damaris pushed past the low-hanging branches, her sandals brushing against soft dirt. The tree where Paul had spoken still stood in the center of the clearing, its bark rough, its roots twisted deep into the ground. But the man who changed her life? Gone? Instead, a familiar figure stood at the edge of the grove, staring down at a broken clay pitcher. Dionicius, the councilman, with sharp eyes and a gentler spirit than most philosophers. He looked up as she approached. "You came back," he said. "I thought we all would," Damaris replied, looking around. "Where's Paul?" "Gone," Dionicius said quietly. "Before dawn." Her stomach dropped. "Why?" A message came. One of the priests, of Dionicius, accused him of insulting the city gods. They whispered his words were poison, that he was stirring unrest. "But that's not true," Damaris said. "Truth rarely matters when power feels threatened." Damaris paced beneath the tree, her sandals digging into the roots. "He didn't even say anything cruel. He invited us to think, no, to feel something real." "That was the problem," Dionicius replied. "Feeling is more dangerous than ritual in this city." He knelt down, picking up the broken clay pitcher at his feet. "They smashed it early this morning. It was Paul's. Someone left it at the grove as a warning." Damaris swallowed hard. This wasn't just about ideas anymore. It was about control and fear and silence. "Where did he go?" she asked. "North, toward Corinth, I think. Maybe further. But he said something before he left. Something he wanted me to tell you." "What?" Dionicius looked up, his voice barely more than a breath. "Stay close to the voice that called you. The voice of God. The voice of truth," he said. "And don't let the silence fool you. He's still speaking." Damaris sat beneath the fig tree, the wind combing through her hair. So much had changed in a matter of hours. She had tasted something eternal, and now the messenger was gone. But something else had settled deep in her spirit. Not panic, not fear, but resolve. "Then I'll speak," she said aloud. Dionicius turned. "What?" "If they silenced him," she said, "then I'll speak. I may not have his scrolls or his stories, but I know what I heard. I know what I felt. That may not be safe, Dionicius warned. Neither is living in a city full of idols and pretending I don't know the truth. And there, beneath the fig tree, in the place where truth first found her, Damaris made her choice. She wouldn't just believe quietly. She would become a voice, even if it meant standing alone. Damaris stood at the edge of the marble steps, the very same place where Paul had spoken, the same stones, the same wind brushing past the columns. But today, the Areopagus was louder, busier. Dozens of Athenians wandered the court, some debating, some performing, some trying to outshout each other. And no one was listening, not really. But she had promised herself she would speak. Even if only one person heard her, even if her voice trembled, even if it cost her everything. She climbed the steps slowly, not like a teacher, not like a performer, just Damaris, a woman who had once worshipped stone and now knew better. Someone laughed as she reached the top. A young philosopher with ink on his fingers and olive pits in his pouch pointed and said, "Isn't that the rich girl who listens more than she speaks?" "Not today," she said softly, and then raised her voice. "People of Athens," she called out. Some turned, others rolled their eyes. One man muttered, "Not another zealot." "I come to speak not about myths or gods with no mouths, but about something living. Something I saw with my own eyes. Truth that speaks back." That got a few more heads to turn. "There was a man here 3 days ago, Paul of Tarsus. You laughed when he said a man rose from the dead. You walked away when he spoke of a God who made you to be known, not feared. Now silence. Uneasy. You thought he was foolish," she continued, "but I didn't. Because while your idols stay silent, I've heard this God speak in the quiet of my soul, and he didn't call me to a temple, he called me to himself." Someone in the crowd hissed, another scoffed, and waved her off. "Get off the stage, leave the preaching to the men. You're confusing fire for foolishness." But one young woman stepped closer. So did a boy in a tunic, barely 12, his eyes wide. Even a scribe put down his pen. "You don't have to believe me," Damaris said, "but I've never felt more awake in my life. And if the God who made the stars hears me, then I'll speak, until he says stop." Suddenly, a hand gripped her arm. She turned. It was Theron. "You've gone too far," he hissed. "This isn't harmless anymore. You're embarrassing your family, drawing the wrong kind of attention." "The truth draws attention," she said, pulling her arm free. "And maybe it's the right kind." "You think this Jesus will protect you from what the council might do?" "He already has," she whispered. "He gave me back my voice." And with that, she stepped down from the platform, not in shame, but with peace. Because something had happened. Not just in her, but in the crowd. The young woman followed her. So did the boy. So did the scribe. Not all, but enough. And sometimes, that's how a city changes. Not with thunder, but with one voice that won't go silent. The meeting didn't happen in a temple or a courtyard. It happened in the back of a candle maker's shop. The wax-scented room was dim, quiet, and warm, hidden behind stacks of sealed jars and rows of flickering lanterns. Damaris sat cross-legged on a worn mat, her hands folded in her lap, listening to the flame dance beside her. There were only 6 of them. Dionicius sat across from her, still in his court robes, though less proud than usual. Beside him, the young boy from the Areopagus picked at a piece of bread. 2 women leaned close together, whispering about what they'd heard from Paul days earlier, and a widow from the harbor, wrinkled and fierce, stood guard by the door. "Is this all?" Damaris asked, glancing around the flickering room. "For now," Dionicius said. "But it doesn't take a bonfire to start a revolution. It takes a single spark." They bowed their heads as he opened a worn parchment. Paul had left it behind. It wasn't scripture, not yet, but it was truth, written in his own hand. "In him we live and move and have our being," Dionicius read aloud. "He is not far from any of us." Damaris closed her eyes. She could still hear Paul's voice, still see the way he stood among idols with no fear, still feel the weight of her own breath when she realized, this is what I was born for. Not arguments, not marble courts, not perfection, but truth. Just then, the door creaked. The widow at the threshold lifted the curtain and froze. A man in black robes stood in the alley. He didn't enter. He didn't speak. He just watched, then walked away. The boy stiffened. "Who was that?" he whispered. "I don't know," the widow said, "but he wasn't here for candles." They closed the door gently, locked it. The room felt suddenly smaller. "The temple priests are watching," Dionicius murmured. "They've seen too many faces turn toward something new. They won't let it spread." "Let them watch," the harbor widow snapped. "They can't crush what they can't see." "But what if they try?" one of the women asked. "What if they silence us like they chased Paul?" Damaris stood. Her voice didn't shake. "Then we don't meet in one place. We meet in 10. If we can't speak on the steps, we speak by wells, in homes, on rooftops." "And if they come for you?" Dionicius asked gently. "Then I'll tell them the truth," she said, "that the unknown God has a name, and he's not far." Outside, the alley was quiet again. But something unseen was shifting. The candles flickered higher. And in the heart of Athens, truth was taking root, not in temples, but in whispers. The letter came with a red seal. Not from a friend, not from a believer, but from the council of the Areopagus. It was short, formal, cold. "Damaris of Athens, daughter of Nestor, you are requested to appear before the circle at midday. A matter of public influence shall be discussed." Her hands didn't shake when she read it. Not yet. But her heart did something strange, something between a thunderclap and a whisper. The last person who stood before the circle for public influence was Paul. And now he was gone. By midday, the marble steps of the council were ringed with silence. Not because the city wasn't bustling, but because everyone knew what this meant. The circle didn't invite ordinary women to speak, not unless something had gone too far. Damaris arrived in a plain robe, her hair tied back, her hands empty. No guards escorted her, but she felt watched all the same. The circle sat in a half-moon of marble chairs, 12 men, some older than the Parthenon, others younger but just as sharp. The high orator sat in the center, eyes unreadable. Theron was there too, not seated, but standing behind the orator's bench, arms folded, watching. "Damaris," the orator said, "you've been seen gathering citizens, speaking of strange teachings, preaching, resurrection." He let the word hang like a smoke cloud. "We asked your teacher to leave peacefully. Now it seems you've taken up his voice." Damaris stepped forward. "His voice didn't belong to him," she said. "It belonged to the truth." A few of the younger members shifted in their seats. Theron's mouth curled into a quiet frown. "Are you denying the gods of our fathers?" one asked. "Do you say Zeus is nothing?" another added. "Do you claim the truth lives in a foreign name?" Damaris breathed in slowly. "I'm not denying what you believed. I'm inviting you to consider what we missed." "Which is?" "That the God we carved altars for, the unknown one, has made himself known. Not through marble, but through mercy." Silence. Then laughter, quick and mocking. "And this God raised a man from the dead?" one scoffed. "From dirt to divine?" another sneered. "You've been listening to Eastern magic and calling it reason." Damaris didn't look away. "I've been listening to the same questions my father asked on his deathbed. Who sees me? Who hears me? Who can I trust when my body fails and the gods say nothing?" She stepped forward, now standing at the heart of the stone circle. "And I finally have an answer." More silence. But this time, it didn't feel like mockery. It felt like some were thinking. The orator leaned forward. "You speak boldly, Damaris, but be warned. Athens thrives on order, and voices that shake foundations are rarely left standing." "I didn't come to shake foundations," she said. "I came to plant roots." And she turned to go. No one stopped her. Not yet. But behind her, Theron's voice rose. "Let her go," he said. "But if she speaks again in public, let the punishment be formal." The orator said nothing, but his silence was a sentence all its own. Outside the court, Dionicius was waiting. "Well?" he asked. "They didn't exile me," she said, "but they're watching." "Then we keep speaking," he replied. "Not loudly," she said. "No," he smiled. "Just everywhere." The gatherings grew. Not in size, but in boldness. They no longer hid behind candle jars or between stacks of scrolls. They met at wells, in courtyards and kitchen corners. Anywhere ears were willing and questions were real. Damaris didn't lead like a priestess. She didn't chant or burn oils. She simply told the truth. Of the God who wasn't far, of the man who rose again, of the voice that still whispered in hearts if you listened closely enough. And people listened. A seamstress brought her sister. A baker shared during dawn deliveries, a scroll keeper, who had once copied myths with shaking hands, now copied Paul's words instead. But not all ears came to listen. Some came to report. It started subtly. A man named Lycon began joining their small gatherings. He claimed he had heard Paul once in Ephesus, claimed he had read every philosopher's work, yet found them all hollow. He was charming, sharp, quick with compliments. "You speak like one of the muses," he told Damaris after one meeting. "Your words could silence the council," he whispered after another. "We need to take this higher," he said. "Wider. Let's print letters, gather crowds." Damaris felt uneasy. She appreciated the enthusiasm, but something about him felt eager. Too eager. "Truth grows in soil," she once told him. "Not on stage." "But truth shouted can pierce through marble," he answered. That night, Dionicius came to her door, breathless. "He's not one of us." "Who?" "Lycon." He was seen entering the marble room. "With who?" "With Theron." Damaris felt the floor tilt beneath her. "They're planning something," Dionicius said. "We don't know what, but we know this. He's not here to believe. He's here to expose." Later that week, Lycon returned to one of their quiet meetings, but Damaris didn't share a lesson that night. She watched. She watched the way his eyes darted when people prayed, the way he smiled too quickly, the way he took notes disguised as sketches. After the group dispersed, she approached him. "Why are you really here?" "What do you mean?" he said smoothly. "You've never once asked a question about Jesus. You only speak of strategy, of speeches, of crowds." She paused. "But truth doesn't chase applause. It changes hearts." "I came because I believe," he said. "Then why did you meet with Theron?" That silenced him, only for a breath. Then he stepped closer, voice low. "Be careful, Damaris. People can only handle so much truth before they decide it's dangerous." She didn't flinch. "Then let them decide, but I won't stop speaking." That night, she moved their next meeting, quietly, carefully, because now she knew the threat wasn't just from the temple or the court. It was from those who spoke like friends but served the gods of fear and control. The first arrest came at dawn. One of the young women, Lydia's cousin, a new believer, was taken outside the potter's shop. No charges, no scrolls, just gone. By noon, a second voice disappeared. A baker from the harbor district. He'd shared Paul's teachings during deliveries. Now, his stall was empty. By nightfall, the whispers reached Damaris. "The guards are watching. The temple has a list. They want names." Damaris didn't wait for a summons this time. She disappeared. Not in fear, in wisdom. She moved through the old bathhouse ruins near the Acropolis. Forgotten tunnels beneath cracked stone, long dried from use, still echoing with ancient steps. She carried no scrolls, only her memory, her message, and a small piece of parchment Paul had once given to Dionicius. When they hide the light, dig tunnels. When they silence you, sing lower. Damaris met her small group by torchlight in a steam tunnel, walls glistening with dew, the floor warm with earth. The old cistern above had been drained for years, but now it protected something sacred. "They've begun to arrest," Dionicius said grimly. "I know," Damaris replied, "and we won't be next, not if we move wisely." The boy from the first gathering spoke up. "Are we still allowed to meet?" "They've made it illegal," Dionicius replied. But truth was never about legality. Damaris looked around the circle. Their faces were different now, not just curious, committed, even scared. They shone. "We may not have scrolls or temples," she said, "but we still have something they don't." "What?" one asked. "Peace and purpose, and a God who hears us even underground." Then the widow from the harbor pushed through the group, her eyes wide. "They raided the fig grove," she said, "tore it apart, burned what they found." A hush fell over the group. "The tree's gone?" someone whispered. "The tree was never the truth," Damaris said. "Only the place we first heard it." She stepped forward, placed her hand against the old stone wall. "We don't need trees or steps or altars. We are the altar now." That night, beneath the earth, they shared bread, prayed quietly, and wrote messages onto cloth scraps with charcoal ink, wrapping them in clay and hiding them in baskets bound for Corinth. Because if the truth couldn't move in the open, it would move in secret, and Athens wouldn't stop it. The message arrived on a piece of ivory, not paper, not parchment, ivory, expensive, elegant, and dangerous. It came in the hands of a servant wearing no symbols, no house colors, no name. Just the words, "You are requested privately at Theron's estate. Midnight. Come alone." Damaris stared at the message long after the servant left. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a trial. It was worse. It was a trap. Dionicius tried to stop her. "You don't know what he'll offer." "That's exactly why I have to go." That night, she pulled her cloak tight and took the long way, through the sculpture garden, across the shadowed steps, past the broken statue of Apollo. Theron's estate stood like a palace, marble lit and silent. The guard let her in without a word. He waited for her in the upper chamber, alone, a table between them, lit by a single blue lamp. "You've caused quite the stir," he said, motioning for her to sit. She didn't. "Say what you came to say," she replied. He smiled. "You always were sharp and stubborn." He reached for a scroll, unrolled it carefully. "This is a decree," he said. "It states that Damaris of Athens publicly withdraws from any unauthorized gatherings and affirms loyalty to the gods of the state." He slid it toward her. "Sign this, tonight, and it's over. No exile, no punishment. You'll be free, respected again, even honored." She didn't move. "And the others?" "No arrests," he said. "So long as they quiet down, let the movement die out naturally. No more fig trees, no more messages. Let it fade." Damaris looked down at the scroll. So clean, so final. A single mark of ink. And she could go back to her life. Back to safety, back to silver dishes and whispered comfort. But in her spirit, she heard a different voice. Stay close to the voice that called you. She looked up. "You're offering me silence. I'm offering you peace. You don't know what peace is." Theron frowned. "If you walk away from this," he said, "you'll lose everything." She stepped forward. "I already lost everything that didn't matter." She pushed the scroll back across the table. "I won't sign away the one thing that finally made me alive." She turned to leave. Theron called after her. "You're throwing away protection." "No," she said. "I'm trusting the one who doesn't need marble to protect what's his." The night swallowed her footsteps as she walked back down the stairs. And though the air was cold, her heart was burning. Because peace wasn't offered in scrolls. It was carved in stone far deeper than any temple, in truth. And she had chosen her side. By the time Damaris reached the old bathhouse, the smoke was already rising. Not thick enough to be seen from the streets, but enough to choke the tunnels where truth had taken root. She rushed down the side steps and into the carved opening beneath the stone arch. The heat hit her first, then the sound, shouts, coughing, running feet, and flames. Someone had lit the eastern tunnel on fire, the teaching tunnel where scrolls had been copied and shared. The parchments were gone, burning. All of them. She spotted Dionicius stumbling out of the shadows, his robe singed at the hem, a cut across his brow. "They came through the harbor entrance," he gasped. 3 of them. Temple guards. No warnings. "Where are the others?" "Scattered. Some ran deeper. The boy, I don't know where he went." That's all Damaris needed to hear. She turned and sprinted toward the far tunnel. The one few used anymore, the one with the collapsed roof. Flames danced along the ceiling now, cracking ancient tiles, sending sparks along the floor. She ducked low, covering her face with her sleeve. She called out once. No answer. Called again. A cough answered, then a voice, small, terrified. "Here!" She turned a corner and saw him. The boy from the Areopagus, trapped behind a broken beam too heavy to lift, smoke curling toward him like fingers, eyes wide with fear. "I can't move!" he cried. "You don't have to," Damaris said. "I will." She dropped to her knees, grabbed the beam with both hands, pulled. It didn't budge. Smoke stung her eyes. Her throat burned. Still, she pulled again and again. Until dash, crack. The beam shifted, enough for the boy to crawl through. She grabbed him, lifted him, and ran. They burst into the cold air together, coughing, shaking, soaked in sweat and ash. The others surrounded them. One of the women wrapped the boy in a blanket. The widow handed Damaris a clay cup of water. But no one spoke for a long time. They all watched the smoke rise behind them. Their safe place? Gone. Finally, the boy looked up at her. "You came back." "Of course I did," she said gently. "Even after what they did. Especially after what they did." He looked down. "I didn't believe everything, not until now." "It's okay," she said. "Truth doesn't need you to be perfect. It just needs you to be willing." The bathhouse was gone, but their voices weren't. The light had moved underground, and now it would move again, above ground, into homes, into hearts, into history. The sun had barely risen when the city gates opened, just long enough for a string of merchants to pass through. Hidden among them, beneath cloaks and inside carts, were voices the city had tried to silence. Damaris walked with her head low and her step steady, the dust of the olive path already clinging to the hem of her robe. Every few moments she glanced back, not in fear, but in finality. Behind her lay the broken pieces of the only world she'd ever known. Athens, her home, her birthright. The place where she'd first asked, "Is there more than this?" She was no longer running from it. She was walking into something greater. Their little group had grown quieter with each step. There was no chanting, no rebellion, just worn sandals on dirt, hearts stitched together by one thing, truth. Dionicius walked beside her, his court robe traded for a plain tunic. He carried only a cloth satchel now, filled with the scraps of Paul's letters they'd managed to save from the fire. The boy walked in silence, a sling over one shoulder and a small scroll tucked under his belt. He'd memorized most of the words inside. The widow walked behind them, eyes sharp as ever, scanning the olive groves and hilltops. They weren't a crowd. They were a seed. At midday they paused in the shade of a crumbling aqueduct near the edge of the old Roman road. Damaris pressed her back against the cool stone, trying not to think about how tired she was. "We're almost at the ridge," Dionicius said, unwrapping a piece of bread. "Once we cross it, the patrols can't follow." "Then we pray our message outruns their fire," the widow muttered. Damaris closed her eyes. The sun pressed warm against her face. "They burned the fig grove," she whispered, "but not the root." Dionicius looked at her. "What root?" "The one God planted in each of us. The one that doesn't need a building to grow." Suddenly, a low whistle echoed from the edge of the path. The group froze. The widow stood instantly, drawing a hidden blade from her cloak. Then, footsteps. Software. Fast. A figure emerged from the trees. No armor, no sword, just worn robes and outstretched hands. Lycon. The group tensed. Dionicius reached for the walking stick he now used like a weapon. "Don't come closer," he said firmly. "I'm not here to betray you," Lycon said, breathing hard. "Not this time." "What makes you think we believe that?" "Because I didn't come alone." He turned. Behind him, 2 others stepped out. A woman Damaris recognized from the old pottery market, and a man she didn't know, but who carried a Roman trade badge under his robe. "They were in the crowd at the Areopagus," Lycon said. "They believed, but they couldn't say it until now." "Why come here?" Damaris asked. "Why now?" Lycon stepped forward slowly. "Because I made a mistake. I tried to silence the truth before I understood it. But it didn't leave me. It haunted me. It followed me like a voice I couldn't unhear." He reached into his cloak and pulled out a scroll, worn, dirt-smudged, Paul's seal still barely visible. "This was meant for you. He wrote it from Corinth. I was supposed to intercept it. I didn't." Damaris took it gently. The seal cracked in her hands. Inside, Paul's familiar script. "To those who still speak, though the stones cry out against them, you are not forgotten. Let them burn scrolls. God writes truth on hearts. Let them scatter you. God multiplies what man breaks. You are seeds, not survivors. Stand firm. For even now, your light is seen in the heavens." Damaris read it aloud to the group. No one spoke. The wind moved softly through the trees. Even the earth seemed to lean in. The boy knelt and traced part of the letter into the dirt with his finger. The widow, silent for once, wiped her eyes with the back of her sleeve. Dionicius exhaled slowly, voice hushed. "Then we're not exiles." "No," Damaris said. "We're messengers." She looked up toward the path ahead. Beyond the ridge lay Corinth. Beyond Corinth, who could know? But the truth wasn't tied to temples anymore. It was tied to people. And wherever they walked, it would walk too. The years had worn soft the streets of Athens. Markets shifted. Temples crumbled. Statues once polished daily now stood cracked, moss creeping along their feet like truth reclaiming space. But one woman still returned every few years, walking slowly through the shaded ruins with the help of a carved staff. Her steps measured but unwavering. Her name was still known in whispers, Damaris, the woman who once defied the council. The woman who once listened to a stranger speak on the Areopagus and never turned back. She sat now in a garden just outside the old gate, a garden she had planted with her own hands in soil that once held marble. Where altars had once stood, she'd planted lavender and fig trees. Where philosophers once shouted, she'd placed benches for quiet reading. Where idols had stood silent for centuries, children now ran laughing, reciting scriptures Paul had once whispered by firelight. "Grandmother," a voice called. She turned. A girl approached, no older than 12, curls wild, eyes too curious for her age. "You forgot your satchel." "Did I?" Damaris smiled. "Or did I leave it so you'd have to follow me?" The girl laughed and handed it over. "Are you going to tell them the story again?" she asked. "Which one?" "The beginning. The unknown God one." Damaris's smile grew soft. She looked across the gathering space where families were arriving, unrolling mats and carrying baskets of bread. No guards, no fear, only faith. Yes, she said, but not just how it began. I think today I'll tell them how it never really ended. She stood slowly, brushing dust from her robe, and walked to the center of the circle as the people settled in. Familiar faces, new ones, all of them listening, waiting, just like she had so long ago. I was once a daughter of Athens, she began, raised to ask sharp questions and speak with perfect timing. I studied under great minds. I bowed to carved gods. I lived surrounded by stone and silence. She paused. And then, one day, a man spoke on the steps of a God who was not far, a God who raised the dead, a God who entered our pain instead of watching from above it. Most people walked away, but I stayed. She looked at the faces in the crowd, some weeping, some smiling, all still. They tried to burn it out of us. They tore down trees, silenced voices, scattered meetings. But truth doesn't rot like scrolls. It roots. We didn't survive. We planted. One woman near the back raised her hand. How did you know it was real? When everything got hard, how did you hold on? Damaris looked at her, eyes gleaming. Because when fire came, he didn't run. When fear pressed in, he whispered still. And when I nearly gave up, his love stood taller than the smoke. The young girl beside her squeezed her hand. Did the others stay with you? Some did. Some didn't. But faith isn't measured by crowds, Damaris said gently. It's measured by fruit. And here you are. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a folded cloth. Inside was the same scroll Paul had written, the one Lycon had delivered long ago, faded now, but still legible. She held it up and read aloud, "You are seeds, not survivors. Let them burn scrolls. God writes truth on hearts. Let them scatter you. He will multiply what they break. Stand firm." As she read, the wind moved gently through the garden. A fig leaf floated down onto the stone path. Children gathered closer, and the words hung in the air like light. Athens was no longer the same city. It had changed, not by force, not by flames, but by faith. And in the middle of it all, the woman who once stood silent among scoffers now led a garden of believers. Proof that even in skeptical places, a sincere heart can respond to truth. And that truth, it never dies. It multiplies. It never dies. It multiplies.